Is your team not performing well? Is morale low and turnover high? Are you falling further behind the competition? I'm here to help. I'm Shani Magoski, and this is the LeaderShifter Show, where business strategy and culture finally meet. Explore shifts of all kinds required to build cultures of trust, engagement, and execution excellence. I promise I am not your typical boring leadership consultant, and I will help you and your team get your shift together. Hey, LeaderShifters, and welcome to episode 100 of the LeaderShifter Show. This is actually quite a milestone for me, so I wanted to put together a really special episode. For your listening pleasure, I've curated some clips from some of my favorite episodes. The first one is episode 85 with Jon Rennie, who is a badass former Navy nuclear sub officer turned leadership guru. We talked about some submarinisms and how they relate to leadership. And when you listen, be sure to enjoy what it means to earn your oxygen. Okay, so there are a few other, submarinisms that I know you talk about with your clients, and I would love for you to share them with us. And one of them is earn your oxygen. What's that?
Yeah, so this is kind of a funny term, and it's very submarine focused. But when you first arrive on a submarine, you're what they call a nub. And a nub is a non-useful body. And a non-useful body means that you are wasting the oxygen and the food of the people that are useful. So you're non-useful when you get on board. And there's this heavy positive peer pressure on you to get fully qualified, to be able to be a responsible watchstander. So I was interviewing a British submarine commanding officer on my podcast, and he said something that was really good. He said, an unqualified submariner is a passenger, and there's no space on a submarine for a passenger. Yeah. So when you're first to come on a submarine and you're not qualified, there is a high level of peer pressure for you to become qualified. So you have everyone else's back, right? So that you can be a competent watchstander. So you can, when there's a casualty, you know exactly what to do and how to do it. Because of that shared vulnerability and shared responsibility, you had to earn your oxygen. You had to prove to the rest of the crew that you could have their back in an emergency. You can have their back when things got, when we got into it with other vessels, let's put it that way. So you had to know your stuff. And so there's this positive level of peer pressure to be able to get qualified. So you had to go through a qualification process. They gave you a qualification card, a call card, and you had to go around the ship and you had to get signatures from all the qualified watchstanders proving you knew every hydraulic system, every electrical system, every torpedo casualty drill. So it takes a year. It took me a year to get fully qualified on every watch station and every aspect of that submarine before they give you what they call the gold dolphins. It's an emblem you wear in your uniform, which says you're fully qualified in submarine operations. Great. So imagine this. I get to my first civilian job, and I mentioned I didn't know what to do, and there was really no onboarding or anything. I was sort of sitting in a cubicle trying to figure out what to do, and there's no call card. Nobody hands you a call card saying, oh, you got to go to all these people and get a signatures to prove that you know what you're doing as an engineer. So I actually did it myself. So I figured out okay, well, no one's going to teach me. No one's going to show me. So I need to do the same things I did on the boat. I want to go around to all the qualified, the experienced people working at this company, and I want to spend time with them. I want to learn what they do. And yeah, I didn't have a call card and I didn't get signatures, but I was like that puppy dog. I was showing up every day. And I said, if you go to the shop floor, take me with you. I want to see what you do. If you're doing this project, I just want to sit with you and just show me how you're using the computer system. So I actually took the initiative to try to get qualified on my own. And the other thing that I did, this is more career advice, but I also volunteered for everything. So anytime we had all employee meetings and there's some HR thing that they like a survey and we need somebody to help us out. I'm like, I'll do it. And then we need someone to get qualified as an internal auditor. I'll do it. So I just volunteer for everything so I could get exposure to every aspect of the business. So I become valuable. I didn't want to be a nub, a non-useful body. I wanted to be a useful body, right? And so a lot of times we let our careers we give our careers to responsibility of our bosses. Well, my boss is going to manage my career. That isn't happening. The only person that manages your career is you. And so you have to actively manage it. And earning your oxygen is exactly that, is becoming useful. And I became so useful that in the short amount of time, yeah, I got promoted to quality manager. Then I got promoted to engineering manager. And at 32 years old, I'd been out of the Navy just 5 years. I got my first manufacturing plant. I was responsible for my first manufacturing plant. So I moved up the ladder quickly, but that was never my objective. My objective was to become useful. And I would say this to everyone who's listening to you: are you useful in your company? Are you adding value? Or are you just getting a paycheck? And so that's what that concept's all about.
Our next episode is number 69 with Dr. Adia Gooden, who I refer to as the Brene Brown of unconditional self-worth. We talk about the difference between self-esteem and unconditional self-worth and its relationship to imposter syndrome, which I know so many of us relate to.
Well, that's a challenge, right? Like, trying to be perfect isn't actually the path to love and acceptance.
Exactly.
And so I had those personal experiences. And then once I was, practicing as a therapist, I started working at one of the top universities in the country at their counseling center. And so I was working with these very high achieving, very smart students. And what I was seeing was similar things that I had experienced, right? So despite getting into this top university, they still didn't feel worthy. They were pushing themselves. They were overworking themselves. They were perfectionists, and they were struggling with these same things. And it was through that and through my sort of own personal journey that I realized that the underlying issue was a feeling of low self-worth. The core problem for so many, I can't say 100%, but for many people, was I don't feel worthy. No matter what I do, I don't feel worthy. And so then I drink, or then I do drugs, or then I procrastinate, or then I overwork myself, right? And so I started to sort of explore this idea of self-worth, of worthiness, of unconditional self-worth as this core thing that was underlying so many things, that if we could get people to feel worthy, then all the rest of their life would start to feel so much better.
Right. Okay. Differentiate for us between self-esteem and unconditional self-worth.
Yeah. So self-esteem is sort of based on how we are showing up in the world in an outward doing sort of way. So it's based on our abilities and accomplishments, on the things we believe we can achieve, right? And it goes up and down depending on our performance, right? So you might have high self-esteem if you just aced a test, if you just got a promotion, if you just did really well on a presentation, and low self-esteem if you made a mistake, if you faltered, if you experienced a failure, if you lost a job. It is possible to have high self-esteem and low self-worth, right? So be really confident, like, I know I can do this thing very well at work, but still have an underlying feeling of I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, or if any mistake happens, I'm definitely not worthy, right? In contrast, our self-worth is based on how we feel about ourselves and how we treat ourselves. And I define unconditional self-worth as the belief that you deserve to be alive, to be loved and cared for, and to take up space just because you're worthy. Not because you accomplished something, not because you look a certain way, not because this or that, but because you're human, right? That you deserve these things as a human being, and then you treat yourself that way because you believe you're worthy.
Yeah, like the inalienable rights, to take it from the Constitution, right?
Exactly.
Okay, now as I'm listening to you distinguish between the two, what's coming up for me is maybe that's why people haven't cracked the code yet on imposter syndrome, or and why people who are such high achievers still doubt themselves and will identify as having imposter syndrome. So how do you overlay your work into that concept?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think low self-worth certainly leads to imposter syndrome, or we can think of imposter syndrome as a manifestation of low self-worth or conditional self-worth. If I meet these conditions, then I'll feel good. But if I don't, then I won't. And the problem is when you put like perfectionism in there, that it's basically never perfect. So you never feel it's good enough. So you always feel like an imposter, right? And what I have found in my work, I actually do a lot of speaking on imposter syndrome and I've done it with, law professors and women surgeons. And what I see in that is the achievement isn't the way out of imposter syndrome. So that's what we think. If I just achieve this next thing, if I just get the promotion, I get the raise, I do this, I do that, right? Like I graduate, I get the degree, then I won't feel like an imposter. But the reality is that achievement doesn't solve imposter syndrome. The thing that helps us to feel less like imposters is believing that we're worthy, right? Is sort of getting out of that cycle of achievement and saying, you know what, I'm worthy regardless.
Next up is episode 61 with Ron Carucci, who is an esteemed thought leader, author, and 3-time TEDx speaker, whose irreverence rivals only mine. So this is a super fun conversation from my perspective. He talks about getting rid of ethical fungus in organizations, and in all seriousness, backed by 15 years of research, he explains the 4 factors that set the conditions for people's behaviors. And when done well, the organization is 16 times more likely to have people tell the truth, behave fairly, and serve a greater good.
Well, first of all, Shani, thank you for that. And my hoping is that the timing is every bit as relevant as we think it is. It is time, isn't it, to have this the conversation we seem to have avoided for the last 20 years.
Yep.
Because our experience of honesty has fallen through the floor. Our expectations, right? You have to look too far. Our expectations of it have gone through the roof. And so it's no longer enough for a leader to not be a liar or an overt jerk. You have to now say the right thing, tell the truth, do the right thing, be just and fair, and say and do the right thing for the right reason, be purpose-driven. Mm-hmm. And honesty is defined now by all 3. It's not just enough to do one of those. If you do one of them, you could be a nice person, be well-intended, be thoughtful, but you're not going to be labeled honest and not reputationally for a long time. I didn't want to write it. I wanted to know, so you used the really wise words before in our pre-show about, how many strategies really fail because the behavior being shaped by the organization actually discourages the very things you need to deliver the strategy. Well, I wanted to know, under what conditions does that happen? Under what conditions will people say the right thing, tell the truth, like your strategy sucks? Will they do the right thing, behave fairly, and serve others versus serve their own interests first? And will they serve a greater purpose, serve the mission behind that strategy? And under what conditions will they lie, cheat, and be selfish? And turns out we can predict. Turns out, we analyzed 15 years of data, 3,200 interviews. Use IBM Watson to do some great algorithmic statistical modeling to be able to predict what are the situations in which one will happen over the other. And we learned that there are 4. There are 4, well, there could be others, but we found 4 very relevant conditions in which organizations are creating the very behaviors that undermine the very things they say they want.
Okay.
First, let's go right to the strategy issue, right? Clarity in who you are, right? We all have on the wall a set of words about ourselves, our missions, our purpose statements, our values. Turns out they actually have to count, right? If the words and actions of your strategy match, meaning you are who you say you are. People's experience, your customers, your employees' experience of your statements of identity are consistent. You are 3 times more likely to have people tell the truth, behave fairly, and serve a purpose.
Yeah.
If you have institutionalized duplicity, meaning we say this, but we do this. We say collaboration. We say we value diversity. We say we're customer focused. But the practices belie that. Now you tell people, in our organization, we say one thing and do another, and that's okay. So now you're 3 times more likely to have people lie, cheat, and be selfish. Second one was accountability. the way we honor each other's contributions, not the way we reward them, but the way I treat your work. If people feel like their contributions are measured with dignity, meaning you honor them as part of who I am, and fairly, including the places where I suck. If I feel that there's dignity and fairness in the way I'm held accountable, you're 4 times more likely to have people lie, tell the truth, behave fairly, and serve a purpose. But if I feel like it's unfair, meaning I'm crammed into some category, I'm given a label, I'm a 2. You have no idea what it took for me to do my work. You set me up to fail. You've given me a job without the resources and authority. If I feel there's unfairness in there, now I'm going to embellish my accomplishments, hide my mistakes, and look out for cover my own ass. 4 times more likely to have that happen. Third with Gooden was transparency and governance, right? Meaning when I show up in the room for a meeting to make a decision, A, is the information in the room reliable? Do I trust it? And do I trust that my voice is welcome to dissent or disagree with what's happening here? Or is what's happening in the room orchestrated theater?
Yeah.
Right? It's a performance. Your job is to make it look like I'm being involved in the decision you've already made. And the information I get to evaluate that has to come from the hallway, the underground, the back channels. If what's happening in the room is transparent and safe, you're 3.5 times more likely to have people tell the truth, behave fairly, and serve a purpose. But if it's all a ruse, now you're 3.5 times more likely to have people lie, cheat, and be selfish. And the last one, which was probably, Shani, our biggest surprise, border wars. If there is fragmentation in the organization, the classic silos that have unresolved issues, so the classic sales and marketing, the operations and supply chain, R&D and marketing,
Service,
sales and service, HR and everybody, right? If those border wars are unresolved and there's a disconnection there and there's misaligned KPIs and there's rivalry, you are 6 times more likely to have people lie, cheat, and be selfish. Because now when you fragment the organization, you fragment the truth. So now we have dueling truths, which means it's not about the truth anymore. It's about my truth, right? Which means I'm right, you're wrong. We have we's and they's. We don't have a we.
Right.
But if you have cohesion, if you have coalesced those seams and stitched them so that we're serving a greater good together, we're co-creating value here, now you're 6 times more likely to have people behave fairly, tell the truth, and serve a purpose. And here's the interesting thing about the statistical models, Shani. They're cumulative. So if you do all 4 of those things reasonably well, now you're 16 times more likely to have people tell you the truth, even when it's hard, do the right thing, even when it's hard, and serve others first, and serve a purpose. But if you suck at all of them, you're 16 times more likely to wind up on the front page headline of a story you never wanted to be in.
All right. Next on deck is episode 24. So this is a solo episode where I honor my mom after she passed away. It'll be 5 years in February, which blows my mind. She actually passed away on Valentine's Day. My mom was a teacher and she touched the lives of hundreds and hundreds of students over the years. And upon reflection after she died, I realized that I am more like her than I ever recognized. So this one might be a little bit sad but uplifting. So what I wanted to go through was a list of why I think my mom was the best, and not necessarily the best mom in the world, but the best for me and how she positively influenced me. And BEST is an acronym. And of course, also means I think she's great. So the B is, there's actually a couple words for each letter. B, the first one is bravery. My mom was very courageous, starting at a young age. When she was growing up in New Jersey, she used to take the train into Philadelphia to dance live on American Bandstand with Dick Clark. And I always loved hearing her stories about that. Thought it was super fun. My mom loved travel. And certainly that's where I got my love of travel for, and would often just make plans to travel alone or with other people that she didn't even know, just because she loved to travel. And I always thought that was super courageous. And another way that I think I really, really picked up on some of my mom's best traits was with tough love. She could be really direct, but in a way that was just super caring. And like, she'd tell you things that maybe you didn't want to hear, but she knew were in your best interest to know. And that's something that I've kind of become known for, which is lovingly naming the elephant in the room and sort of mentioning some things that other people may be afraid to mention, but we gotta work through them. The second B is for benevolent, as in generous. My mom was very generous with her time and energy. Can't say she was she was generous with money up until a point, but she was a teacher her whole career. So it's not like, she had millions of dollars to just give away. She was extremely beneficent with her time for her students. She always did extracurricular things. She sponsored the yearbook, the debate team, and so forth, and really was always trying to develop her students in lots of interesting ways. And this is actually part of my eulogy, and there are a couple of things in here that I wanted to share. So this is a quote from a former student who wrote to us when they heard my mom had passed away. And she was in touch with so many former students from the 70s and 80s and 90s years ago because of Facebook and social media. So this student writes, the Duber, as she was known because her last name's Duberstein, the Duber was teaching something called journalism, which I decided was a sneaky alias for another English class. I had my suspicions, but still signed up for journalism. Carol, my mom, was energetic, passionate, direct, and bossy. And it was perfect. She was as much a big sister as she was a teacher. She called me out when I was slacking, and she had my back when things got tough. Her class was a safe place. We were expected to learn, but allowed to be teenagers. And we got so many stories like that about students who remember her as being brave and generous, like speaking up and trying to get the best out of her students. And that's a lot of times what I'm really trying to do for my coaching and consulting clients. All righty. Now we've got episode 22 with Bethany McLean, who is a former Goldman colleague of mine, and you would know as the journalist who broke the Enron story. She'll talk to us about how she hooked in early to the Enron story and expand it more broadly to how to think like a journalist. In other words, how to be a contrarian.
So I started to get to know short sellers and soon developed a profound respect for a lot of them in terms of the amount of work they do, the research they do, the contrarian thinking they do. I remember Jim Chanos, which is how the Enron story came about, said to me at one point, I have no problem finding qualified people who want to come and work here. There's no shortage of people with the right technical background, but give me someone who could actually be contrarian and remain contrarian even when the world is telling them they're wrong. And now that's a thing. And anyway, so I got to know Jim and the people who worked for him, and I would just hound them saying, what are you guys working on? Anything interesting? And finally, at one point, one of them said, you might want to take a closer look at Enron. We can't figure out how it makes money. And I was it's actually an interesting moment, perhaps for your show, just because I had such an untraditional background for a journalist, having never worked in journalism and coming out of finance. And it was just one of those weird moments in life where my very untraditional background turned out to be exactly the right thing for this story, because I had no compunction at that point about taking out Enron's 10K and 10Qs and starting to go through the numbers. I worked for someone at Goldman who was very big on sitting in due diligence meetings. How does the money move through this company? How does it move through the cash flow? How does it move through the income statement? Where is it going on the balance sheet? And so I kind of knew how to think that way. And so it was very apparent from just going through Enron's money and then talking to a bunch of people that the people who were believers in the company didn't understand how it worked and couldn't explain it. They'd just revert to, well, these are the smartest guys we've ever met, so we don't need to deal with the details. We just basically know it's going to be fine. And then a lot of weird things in their financial statements, like a cash flow statement that totally didn't reconcile with an income statement, and a balance sheet that was not the picture of a profitable, successful company. And so there were all these things that were interesting clues to the fact that something didn't make sense here.
Jeez. And, it's funny because I worked in the oil and gas group at Goldman, and in 93, 4, 5, Enron was my biggest client. I mean, I wasn't the lead, obviously. I was doing the grudge work, the drudge work. But I remember being on site there and them showing us all the different trading operations and their trading books, and thinking, like, I don't really understand this. And at the time thinking, I just must be stupid. To your point of, oh, they're just so smart. It's amazing what, like, a public relations facade it all was, right?
Well, I think I've often thought this, that I got really lucky, because if I had come in, so much in life depends on your perspective, and and not only on your perspective, but on your initial perspective, on the way you're introduced to something. So if you're introduced to something through the corridor of belief, you're far more inclined to believe what you see. If you're introduced through something through the corridor of skepticism, you're far more willing to ask questions. And I'd often thought, what would I have ended up writing if I had come to Enron through their PR department and gone to see them first, and, had all their glossy presentations and their spiffy executives presenting to me? What would my perspective have been then? As it was, I came to it from a questioning perspective, and so I was able to see it differently. But I do think, speaking of shifts, it's a really key question in life, that the attitude or the mindset that you bring to something really does help dictate what you'll see.
Absolutely. I was just reading an article recently about 100 different unconscious biases that people have. Yeah. Which is all part of that, how the mindset we bring, the filters out through which we look at various situations. It's super interesting.
It can be pre-existing bias, but also just the bias of approach, the bias engendered by how you approach something. Right?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so fast forward to other people started to say, yeah, something doesn't make sense here.
I'm not really sure. The Wall Street Journal did a couple. So my story came out in February or March, and it honestly didn't come out to that much of a big bang. It sort of was ignored, but it wasn't ignored in the sense that I don't think my story precipitated anything. I think it picked up on the underlying skepticism that was growing in the market toward Enron. I think I raised questions people were starting to ask, albeit not out loud, but in private circles. And so by the end of the summer, the stock was falling pretty precipitously. Jeff Skilling quit as the CEO. The Wall Street Journal did a couple of stories shedding light on these weird partnerships that Andy Fest, then CFO, was running, and the company just went into a death spiral. But it wasn't until after the bankruptcy that people were like, why didn't anybody raise questions about this? And then people looked back and found my article, which in the end, I've often joked it should win awards for the meekest title in business history, because it was, is Enron overpriced? Yeah. So it wasn't so much a story that I've always fought back against the idea that it broke the Enron story, because it really didn't. It raised questions about Enron at a time when nobody else was. But to me, breaking the story requires really laying out what's going on. And my piece didn't do that. So I've always felt that piece itself got too much credit in the sort of Enron progression, or whatever you want to call it. But it's just that there were so few skeptical pieces that it stood out.
Got it. Okay. And so what led you to expound a lot further and write the book, Smartest Guys in the Room, which then not only was a book, but a documentary?
That's what we as journalists do when the train wreck comes, right?
And finally, there's episode 21 with Katrina Markoff, who's a longtime dear friend of mine and the founder of gourmet Chicago-based chocolate company Vosges Haut Chocolat. We talk about her journey to create Vosges and how she came to use some of the most unusual ingredients in chocolate. They're commonplace now, but back when she started her company 25 years ago, it was completely innovative. And what I love so much about it, in addition to adoring Katrina, is that she discovered so many of the ingredients through the cultures that she experienced while traveling.
I believed that my heart should lead me. My mom reinforced that so much to me as a kid. So I ended up deciding right after school to move to Paris and go to the Cordon Bleu, which was incredible. Yeah. And in that experience, being aware of, how I feel in the environment, I'm like, the French at the time were very true to tradition. Okay. So Escoffier and those old school methodologies of what true haute cuisine was, or, just the proper way of making sauces and proper way of serving. There are a lot of proper things. And I guess I'm a bit of a rebel inside. I was like, well, why can't we do it like this? And they're like, no. So I ended up meeting this chef from India, and he was the one who, like, he doesn't know, but I had this demonstration at the Cordon Bleu, and he put on dessert, he made like royal Indian food, and he put on this dessert all this pounded silver leaf, pure silver. And I was like, what is that for? And he was like, well, you always need to think about your digestion with your last course of the meal. And silver and metals are aids in digesting food. And I was like, oh my, that was like a moment for me. I was like, never thought about my digestion and food. And like, I just thought about flavor, right? And that was the first little cue to me, like, oh, this is interesting. Other cultures and how they eat food. And then I got this chance to move to Spain and work at El Bulli, which was a huge, obviously, shift in culinary, food, and molecular gastronomy was sort of born out of that. But what was more interesting to me about the fact that he was doing super unique things is that Ferran had a very strong philosophy around how he approached creating things that were seemingly completely bizarre, to people. Like, you're making, tomato sorbet savory, you're, playing with gelatin to make cubes of, shellfish, just very unique. And so he would tell us like how he viewed texture. It became a science. It was like all the textures listed, all the flavors listed. And then his creativity was around kind of the art of like blending those, I think maybe in his head, how they would come together. And so to me, there was like, what he taught me was really about, there is a deep story behind the work, not shock. And at least I interpret it that way. And also like, he said one thing to me that made me go on this trip around the world, which was this huge vote of confidence to someone. I don't know that I was quite good at what I did. I mean, I was really young and whatever I was, 22 or whatever. And he said, you have a really good base. Don't waste your time on Michelin restaurants. Go use your palate and your imagination to guide you. You have a good base. And I'm like, you do? Okay. And he's like, go travel the world. And then come at it from your own imagination, come at it from your own point of view. And that was like, wow. So then I ended up buying a ticket around the world, going east. And then I went for 9 months. And I basically went from being around Europe and working in different places in Europe more traditionally to going straight to basically Thailand. And that was my first experience in Asia. And I was blown away because I'd never seen ingredients like this. I'd never had Thai food. If you can only imagine, 20 years plus ago. Yeah, that was really big in the States, and people were into French food and some Italian, but they didn't really know yet Japanese and Thai. And like, it was all just sort of like really coming up. And I remember being like, oh my God, I've never seen ingredients. And then people would grow it in their house. And then I would see like a tradition in which they used food for healing or for a particular age. When you're this and your baby, you give them the olive oil in Italy to help them with digestion. I started remembering all these cues from my trip. And when I went to Australia, the Aboriginal culture to me was absolutely fascinating. The ingredient set that they used was completely different. And again, I was like just discovering these ingredients through cultures and through, the rituals I would see around wellness, around religion, around, beautiful architecture. I would be inspired by like the work, and somehow I saw food in it or saw some sort of expression.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this special 100th episode of the LeaderShifter Show. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Go to theleadershiftproject.com to sign up for the Scoop newsletter and explore all the resources from this podcast in the show notes. And follow me on Instagram at The LeaderShift Project and LinkedIn under my name, Shani Magoski, for inspiration and content about all things leadership. Make it a great day.